Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Market Smarter, Not Harder, Using Your Own Data for Marketing Success. So before I introduce today's presenter, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on any feedback issues during the presentation, but it doesn't mean that you can't interact with us. If you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A box in your control panel. I'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we'll be sure to leave plenty of time to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. If you have audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, try logging off and then logging back in. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on the OAC's YouTube channel by the end of business on Friday, July 19th, so tomorrow. So if you aren't able to catch the entire live session or you'd like to listen again, you can find it there. That takes care of all of our housekeeping items. So now on to the main presentation. We are excited to have with us today Ceci Dadisman, who serves as the Digital Marketing Manager at Form, located in Cleveland. Ceci is a nationally recognized leader in digital and social media marketing with more than 10 years of experience successfully marketing the arts and nonprofits utilizing innovative and cutting-edge initiatives. When she's not working her magic at Form, you can find her speaking at national conferences such as Arts Midwest and the American Alliance of Museums, or you may have spotted her at our very own Arts Impact Ohio 2018 conference, where she presented a very popular session on social media strategy. We could host an entire year's worth of webinars on all of the fascinating things that Ceci's involved with, but today we're here to focus on how to get the most out of your marketing efforts. So Ceci, thank you so much for being with us today, and I will let you take it from here.
Alrighty, thanks so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So what we're going to talk about today is how to harness the power of the data that you already have and use that to make smarter decisions. This is a big topic, and we're going to talk about some different channels that you might use for communications. And I'm going to give some examples and some very tactical things on how to do this per channel, but then I'm also going to talk about some bigger picture, some concept and framework things as well. So let's get started. Oh, one more thing. I have this webinar divided up into sections. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Q&A box at the end of each section and see if there are any questions. So if you have questions while I'm talking, please feel free to type that in, and then we'll address them periodically throughout the webinar. And then, of course, we can do questions at the end as well. So thank you so much for that introduction, Katie. I'll tell you just a little bit more about who I am and what I do. So I am, in short, an arts marketer. I've been doing arts marketing for a long time. I've always done arts marketing. I also work with other nonprofits as well, but primarily I work with performing and visual arts organizations. I have worked on sort of all sides of organizations, from being a full-time employee, also being a consultant, and now here I work at Form, which is an agency, and we only work with arts and culture and nonprofit. So I've always tended to have a little bit of a focus on digital marketing and new technology and how to integrate that in to arts organizations and arts experiences. But I also have a lot of experience doing traditional marketing methods as well. And we'll talk about some of those in this webinar today. So we can't talk about using data or communications without talking about the different channels that we use and some fundamental things about communicating what we do, our events, our mission with the public. We all have something that I like to call our communications ecosystem. And in this ecosystem, all of the different channels that we use to communicate exist. They all sort of peacefully coexist and work together within your ecosystem to get your message out to the right people. It's important to remember that we can't look at any one channel in a vacuum. right? We can't say, I need to sell tickets to our upcoming event. Let's run a Facebook ad. We can't look at Facebook in its own bubble and expect that to bring us the results that we're looking for. When we have a communications campaign, we need to look at all of the channels and how they work together to get that positive outcome. By the time someone buys a ticket or buys a membership or walks through your doors, odds are that they have seen your message on a variety of channels, right? This is why calculating ROI return on investment is so difficult to do right now. It's nearly impossible, because just because somebody purchases a ticket on your website, let's say, and you're tracking that conversion through your Google Analytics, that probably means that, well, number one, they were driven to your website from somewhere, either social media or an email. They may have also received a direct mail piece that you sent if you do postcards or brochures. They may have received that direct mail piece, seen an email, engaged with you on social media, gotten your reminder email, which finally pushed them over to the website to actually purchase that ticket. All of these things work together. So we're going to talk about individual channels, yes, and tactical things there, but it's important to keep in mind what the other channels are doing to reinforce that messaging through that life cycle. And you'll notice that I do have a traditional in here. I talked about, that I have a lot of experience with traditional. I think traditional is a very important part of any communications campaign. I am never one to say that print is dead. I don't think that print's going to die anytime soon, but just like anything else, you have to make sure that you're targeting that print to the right people and that you're utilizing it in the best way. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. All right. I want to make this really big, bold statement. This is the title of this webinar is Market Smarter, Not Harder, right? But there's probably some fundraising folks on this webinar or who will end up watching it. Marketing and development are exactly the same thing, right? Everything that I'm going to say today is 100% applicable for fundraising. It's also going to be applicable for education and community engagement as well. All of these things, what we are doing is we are trying to communicate in a compelling way to our targeting groups and create a relationship with those people that becomes so strong that they end up taking an action, right? On the marketing side of things, that may mean purchasing a ticket to a show. On the fundraising side of things, that might be a donation or a membership. In education and community engagement, maybe that is a teacher bringing their class to you for a field trip, right? It's all the same thing. And I would ask that you also think about, we talked about that communications ecosystem. I would ask that you also think about how all of your organization's messages are working together, right? When somebody receives a communication from your organization, they're not going to say, oh, I got this from the development department, or this is from the marketing department. It's all from your organization. That's what they are gleaning from that. All right, so let's talk about today's communications landscape here. We are inundated with messages from brands, right? I'm sure if your email inbox looks like mine, you probably get a lot of promotional messages every day, right? We see a lot of posts from brands on our social media. We have a tougher time now getting our message through that clutter because there is just such a high volume out there. And you also have to remember too, that people are receiving a lot of messages, many more messages from, big brands, from for-profits, from Zappos and Amazon and Target and J.Crew and whoever. We are competing with those messages as well. Just like when you send something out, like I mentioned a minute ago, people are not going to be able to discern and say whether it's from marketing or development. You know, when you are sending out a message, it's going to be within, they're not going to say, oh, well, that's a nonprofit. Or most people are not going to say, oh, well, that's a nonprofit, so I'm going to look at that differently than I'm going to look at another brand's communication. It's all about creating relevant and compelling communication so that you can deliver your message to the right people in a way that it is going to cut through the clutter because it is so relevant to that person at that time. When we send out sort of blanket messages or blasts, like an email blast, and we're sending the same message to everyone or almost everyone, there's a very low chance that almost everyone is going to find that relevant. There is no one message that everyone on your email list is going to find to be relevant. And it doesn't matter how big your email list, it can be a really small list, but I will probably guarantee you that there's going to be some sort of segmentation in there. I worked with organizations that have a list of 500 people, but at the very minimum, they're going to have 2 different segments, 2 different groups of people that they're going to talk to in different ways. When we segment our communications, which is creating and identifying groups of people and then figuring out how to communicate with them and what message they're going to find relevant, there is a lot higher chance that we're going to reach those people with something that's relevant, and then their engagement levels are going to go up. And that's what we want, right? We want people to engage with our content. All right. I want to end this little section here, or we're getting close to the end of this section, with this thought. This thought is not mine. It's by my dear friend Lee Gallagher, who literally wrote the book on something called precision marketing. And the basis for what I'm talking about today is essentially that. It's precision marketing. The book is also called Precision Marketing. I mean, it's available on Amazon if you are so inclined to read it. Relevance is what we're looking for here. Relevance is going to drive that response. Relevance is going to drive engagement with our messaging, and then response to our messaging and our communications. And it's that response, right, that's going to drive revenue, right? And we could also say conversions instead of revenue. So a conversion is when someone takes an action, because there can be non-revenue and revenue-based conversions, right? Let's say you offer a free program. So your communications are simply to get people to register for that program. That registration, even though it's free, we would say that that's a conversion. So it would be sort of in this same general zone as what this quote is talking about here in terms of revenue. If there is one thing that you take away from this webinar today, let it be for you to stop for just a minute before you send out a communication, before you mail a brochure, before you send an appeal letter, before you send an email, and stop and think and say, who am I sending this to? And is it going to be relevant for that group of people? This is how we create or we achieve relevance, is by sending the right message to the right person at the right time through the right channel. And it's also important to remember that the right channel for a particular group of people may be a channel that you're not currently using. A big example of this that I see frequently is Instagram, right? If you are trying to reach young people, if you have programs for teens, college-age students, anybody really under the age of, 35-ish, you're probably going to want to be using Instagram because that is what they are active on. Posting messages about those events on Facebook is not going to be the right channel to use to really achieve that engagement. And also, we need to remember to use storytelling, right? We as arts organizations have so many great stories about what we do. Stories about, the artists, the performers, the art itself, your staff, your building, your theater. We have so much content, and creating those stories and creating a narrative that bring people in. It's a little bit of a mix of kind of selling and education, right? You're trying to get people to come to an exhibition at your museum. They may not be familiar with that artist or the type of art. So you kind of got to educate them a little bit along the way to say, this is why this is so interesting and why you should, well, to be blunt, care about this particular exhibition in order to get them at the end to actually attend, right? And this is for current and potential audiences. It's a lot easier to keep current patrons, and it's a lot cheaper in terms of cost per acquisition than it is to get new ones. And just because someone has attended something or bought a ticket doesn't mean that they're necessarily an expert in what you do or that they know everything about what you do. They still need to kind of be brought along and be engaged along the way so that you're not going to lose them, so that they're not going to kind of fall off. All right, this is the end of this first little section. Do we have any questions?
It doesn't look like we do, but I just wanted to remind everyone that if you do have questions, please use the Q&A chat box in your control panel, and we will happily answer those for you. So it looks like we don't have any currently, so
cool.
We can keep on plugging along.
Okie doke. All right, so.
Oh, wait, we just got one. I'm sorry, Ceci.
No worries.
Someone asked, what's a good way to segment an email or mailing list that isn't currently segmented?
Ooh, I will talk a lot about that in a hot minute.
Perfect.
And
right.
then if I don't answer your question with all the words I'm about to say, we'll come ask it again at the end and we'll come back to it. But yeah, I'll talk a lot about that. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do when you're creating any sort of communication is establish your outcomes, right? You want to have, every communication is going to have a desired outcome. If you're looking at it and say, oh, well, we just want to tell people about this, then that means that communication is not going to be specific and targeted enough, right? Sometimes the outcome can simply be to get somebody to go to your website to learn more. Maybe it's an email and it's not a hard sell email. It's not a buy tickets email, but maybe it's a, you know, we just announced the cast for our opera, right? So providing a link in the email to go over to your website for people to find more information about the cast, that would be the outcome. And that's going to affect what's in the email and how you talk about how people can achieve that outcome. So backing up from the outcome, right? That's the last thing in the process. You then also want to look at the messaging. Are the words that you are using in that communication going to be relevant and easily understood by the people you're trying to reach, by those that you are targeting? Right? Sometimes, like I said before, you know, there is no one message that's going to be relevant to every single person you're talking to, right? At a very basic level, let's think about it as, you know, let's say you are a ballet company and you have subscribers, right? And then you have single ticket buyers. You know, you have subscribers who come to everything in a season. They renew every year. And then you have this group of single ticket buyers that maybe comes to one thing every few years, something like that. You're going to be able to talk to subscribers in a much different way than you would to single ticket buyers. If they're a subscriber, they have a certain level of knowledge that a single ticket buyer might not. Now you may be saying, well, yes, a single ticket buyer could have a very high level of knowledge, but you know, we can make a reasonable assumption here that the subscribers know you really well. They have a higher level of knowledge about what you do in your organization because they come to everything in a season. So you can talk to them in that way. With the single ticket buyers, you're going to want to make sure that you're using language that really anybody can understand. And I'm going to talk about this in more detail as well. So every time you're creating an email, you're sending out a letter, you're sending out a brochure, think of these three things right from the get-go. Who are you targeting with this? Who are you talking to? what words are going to be easily understood and compelling to them, and then what the desired outcome is for that particular communication. As arts organizations, we are super duper experts at creating barriers. And I say this lovingly because I'm an arts administrator and I'm a former artist as well. Most of the barriers that we create are things that we have complete control over, and they're communications based. It's how we talk about what we do. This here, what you see on the screen, is a slide from the Culture Track report, which comes out every 3 or 4 years. LaPlaca Cohen, an agency in New York, puts it out. And basically, it's the result of a big survey that they do that talks about, what motivates people to attend arts and culture, what their views are on arts and culture events, their familiarity, all kinds of things. You can download Culture Track free at culturetrack.com. I highly recommend that you do because it has some really, really great insights in it. But I think that this is particularly important because the number one barrier to cultural participation is it's not for someone like me. And that is something that we create with our communications. If you receive, or if you're talking to someone and they're using a whole bunch of words that you don't understand, or if you receive something in the mail from a company and they're using terminology that's, it's all Greek to you, right? You're probably going to take a step back and say, oh, this must not be for me because I don't understand what they're saying here, right? So we have complete control over removing this barrier. And it all comes down to democratizing our communications, right? Making sure that our communications are really for all and easily understood by all. And that means eliminating jargon. This is the big thing here. We have a lot of jargon. We have a lot of words that are unique to our industry, words to use to describe certain things. If you're an orchestra, you may use words, and you're doing a symphony, you may use words like, movements, say the first movement, the fourth movement. If you're an opera company, you're using words like overture, things like that. These words aren't necessarily known by just kind of your average person. So when we talk about communicating, we need to focus on who we're trying to reach, the patron themselves, and what words are going to reach them in the best way and allow them to understand and not feel like whatever you're sending them is not for them, right? It's also important not to assume a level of understanding. I talked about that, a little bit ago, subscribers versus single ticket buyers, right? You can make sort of a reasonable assumption when you have very neat and discrete groups like that, right? But even with the single ticket buyers, you don't want to assume that they know what a movement of a symphony is, right? They may not. And it's easy to explain what that is using other words other than movement, right? Even though that is the very term that is used to describe that particular thing. I want to share with you this little anecdote here because I think it's really, really telling, and it's something for us all to think about. So the Wallace Foundation partnered with Ballet Austin a few years ago, and they published the results of this partnership. You can go, if you Google Wallace Foundation and Ballet Austin, it'll be like in the first couple of search results. It might be very interesting for you to do that to see the full report here. I'm just going to pull out one little snippet. So Ballet Austin wanted to find out more about the patron journey. They wanted to find out sort of where people go when they come into the organization through the Nutcracker, right, which has broad appeal. If people don't go to the ballet ever, still they've likely seen the Nutcracker at some point in time, right? They wanted to see after people come in through the Nutcracker, where they go, why don't they end up at the mixed repertoire performances? What's stopping people from going to those? What they found in a nutshell is that while they were making a lot of assumptions about the patron journey, it's not as neat and tidy as they thought it was, right? But then they also found that people coming in through the Nutcracker, or people that they sort of viewed as being less engaged, it wasn't that they weren't interested in the mixed repertoire performances. In fact, they very much were. However, how they messaged those performances, how they talked about them, was the deterrent. They were using terminology that these folks didn't understand. They were unfamiliar with it. And the prime offender of this was the term mixed repertoire, which is the exact term that you use to describe that type of show, is mixed repertoire, right? That term alone was making people think, this is not for me because I don't understand what this means. So it taught them a good lesson to kind of take a step back and look, are we using jargon here? Are we using a term that is unique to our industry or our organization that might not be understood by someone else, by someone who's not super highly engaged? And kind of moving into the whole point of this webinar today, talking about data, is that we can't rely on anecdotal data to make decisions anymore. As arts organizations, we tend to say, well, our people like this, or our people do this, or, this is going to go over well, or, our subscribers prefer this, right? We need to look at our actual data to determine how we're going to talk to people, and to look at behavior to try to optimize that to get those outcomes that we're looking for. Okay. The great thing about us is that we have a ton of data already. All of the data points that I'm going to talk about today are things that you probably have. So you don't need to spend any money on this. It's just time and kind of shifting the framework of how maybe you do something, but you won't need to spend any money to access this data. The first thing that you're going to need to do is determine how you're going to segment things. What buckets are you going to put people in, right? You probably have a group, you've identified subscribers, you've identified members, you know who your donors between, $50 and $100 are, right? These are segments. You know who your donors of 5,000 and up are. That's a segment, and you would talk to them in a very specific way versus maybe a donor who gave you $10 3 years ago, right? Now, this is the one paid thing that I would like to offer or suggest, and it's not very expensive. Once you have your datas and your lists, your ticket buyers and your donors, you could do something called a data append to get some additional information about them. So a data append will give you information like age and income, presence of children in the home, things like that. So if you wanted to spend a little bit of money to gather that information, you could do a data append. And there's always questions about, well, how do I do that? Where do I go? Usually anywhere that anybody who can sell you a mailing list. So this might be a mail house that you work with, or another data services company that you've purchased a list from before. They can append your current list, right? So, and I will provide some resources to you at the end, specifically for data appends as well. All right. So your data append can help you identify information and different data points for your current audience, right? That then you can use to find your next logical audience, your next aspirational audience, right? We like to say, oh yeah, well, we want young people, right? That's that's sort of the dialogue right now. Well, young might be different for varying organizations. If you do the data append and you find that your ticket buyers are overwhelmingly over the age of 80, then young for you might be 50. And people who are age 50 and above, you're going to communicate with them in a very different way than you're going to communicate with people who are 30, which is maybe what you might have had in your head as being young, right? But you wouldn't necessarily know that and be able to sort of be guided to that next logical audience without actually knowing that information. And that's what the data append can give you. All right, let's talk about some traditional, and then after this little section, we'll do another break for Q&A. Let's talk about how you can use data for your traditional efforts. And I'm kind of going to focus on like direct mail here, because I'm pretty sure that everyone on this webinar is using direct mail in some way. So this is going to be a common refrain. Not everyone on your list should get the exact same mailing, because there's not going to be one message or one type of collateral that's going to be relevant or useful for every single person on that list, right? The big thing that I like to bring up here is a season brochure, right? A season brochure is probably your most expensive piece of collateral that you do each year. It's probably the biggest in terms of size and number of pages, right? And because of that, it probably costs you the most postage, right? Because it may or may not go first class. Even if it does, right? You know, you're still mailing it. If you're mailing it to your entire list, that's a big expense. The only people that should receive your full season brochure are the people who are the most highly engaged with you, because they're the only ones who are going to care about every single thing you're doing, right? I know that's contrary to what we usually think. We usually say, this has everything we're doing, so we're going to mail it to absolutely everyone, right? Which, hey, if you've got boatloads of money and you want to do that, absolutely go for it, right? But I'm willing to bet that we all are looking at budgets and trying to optimize anywhere that we can. So you're probably going to see the best result from that season brochure mailing by sending it to the people who you have identified as being highly engaged. If you're a performing arts organization or organization that has membership, you know, those types of people, you know, members, subscribers, things like that, where your outcome for that brochure is a membership, a subscription, something like that, then those are the people who you're going to want to spend that money to send that brochure. What this means when we're talking about creating these segments and not mailing your brochure to everyone is that you're probably going to send multiple versions or variations of these mailings to your different groups. So your most highly engaged people might get the full brochure, but then maybe people you've identified as not quite as highly engaged might get a postcard version that just has a simple list of what's going on and a call to action to go to the website to find out more, or even a postcard version of the thing you're doing next season that you think that they will like the most based on data that you have, right? And the other big thing to remember is that when you're creating these multiple versions, you have to make sure that the messaging matches the target, right? So let's say you've got that season brochure going out, and one of the things that you're doing is a performance for children and families. So your target for that performance is probably moms, right? Because moms overwhelmingly make the decision when it comes to activities for their children. So maybe those moms don't get that full brochure because what's going to be relevant to them is that one kids show. So instead of getting the season brochure, you're going to send them a postcard that's just for that kids show. And you're going to use language in it that's going to be the most compelling to a parent. Maybe the fact that it's a kid-friendly length, right? It's only an hour long, or, you know, you're differing from your normal procedures where kids under the age of 5 aren't allowed in the theater, you know, and because every kid, even babies, can come into this one, right? It's much more relaxed, right? These are the kinds of things that you would send in that particular thing that you may not include in everything else. You can be a lot more specific, right? So you can segment by a lot of different things, right? You can segment by age, you can segment by income, you know, and then tie the communication that you're sending out for those segments, right? So if you have daytime programs like a lunch and learn or something like that, or lectures that occur during the day, right? You're probably going to segment that by age, right? Because you're going to want to find people who are not working during the day who would be interested in something like that, right? Income, if you have something that is a higher ticket price, right? Income is a factor on there. And obviously, if people have children, one thing that we forget a lot in terms of messaging is, yes, kids shows, yes, we want to send them that as well. We want to send parents that. But also, you could flip it around and say, you know, come to this show as a date night, right? Because that is your desired outcome. For that communication, for that postcard, the desired outcome is not for them to bring their kids to something. It's for them to come to something. I have a really quick little example here. This is from Palm Beach Opera. I was the director of communications at Palm Beach Opera for a long time. And we did these sorts of segmentations, right? And one of the first ways that we kind of dabbled in this was to see how engaged people on our list were who had not come to a main stage opera performance. You know, maybe they had come to some, like a community performance, something else. Maybe they were just on our list because they requested a mailing from us, but they weren't in our system as an actual ticket buyer. And we also had a small purchase list that was based off of a data append. So it was very specific. There's very targeted people on this purchase list. So we were saying, well, this is going to be their first time at a main stage opera. And, you know, we did it for Macbeth, right? Bolt, right? Not for something that is generally thought of as a first opera, but we were just like, let's do it. So when we created this campaign, we talked to them like we knew them, right? We knew they hadn't been to a main stage opera. So, and we also did a little offer for them, right? So, and we kind of made, Palm Beach Opera's tickets they have very reasonably priced tickets, but they're not super cheap, right? And there's the stereotype that opera is really expensive. So we wanted to try to see if an offer would get these people engaged. So this is the front of the postcard. This is a very old postcard. Their branding is different now. But you know, this is the front of the postcard. We're telling them clearly, we know it's your first time and we've got a deal just for you for your first time. And you'll notice on the back, we don't have anything about the conductor or the soloist. There's no headshots. There's no crazy complicated description, because Macbeth, I mean, if you went to high school, you probably read Macbeth, right? So there's a level of familiarity there. On our other postcards that we sent out for Macbeth to our highly engaged people, yes, there was a press quote about, you know, this soloist got a good review in the Times, and, you know, here's this quote about that, right? Things that those people would find interesting. But for this group, you know, we're answering these very basic questions. You know, when is the show? How do I buy tickets, right? Are the seats good or not? Yeah, it's a $30 ticket, but are those good seats, or am I going to be up in the peanut gallery, right? So this is just a quick example of talking to a segment like you know them and identifying those things that are going to be compelling to that group of people. Okay, before we start email, let's take a quick break for questions, if there are any questions.
I don't think we have any. I think that was a really helpful example, seeing that in action, how you might, you know, kind of segment things out and how you might change your messaging depending on your target audience. That was really, really helpful to see that in action. Thanks, Ceci.
Sure. Okay, we're going to go right into email. I have to warn you in advance, email is my favorite thing, and I get really nerdy and excited about it. One of the reasons why I like email so much is because the cost is so low, right? You know, maybe you have a really small list and you're using like MailChimp's free version. Maybe you have a bigger list, but you're still, you know, you're paying $50 or less, odds are, per month. So email, to make email effective, it's really just about time and effort. It's not about money. so much. Email also has the highest ROI of any digital marketing thing that you can do still. That comes out year after year. New data just came out at the end of last year that confirmed that again. We have been doing email for the longest, right? It was the first kind of thing that we could do on the digital front. And I feel like we tend to get in ruts. You know, we send out our email newsletter every month on the whatever, the second of the month, and we've been doing it like that, you know, forever. So we kind of get stuck in this little rut. And what I'm hoping to share with you here are ways to kind of get out of that rut and get more action and more engagement in your emails. All right. You'll notice this from before, right? I said it was going to be a common refrain. Not everyone on your list should get the same email. If you are sending out an email to everyone or almost everyone on your list, it's probably your email newsletter. Yeah, it probably goes out once a month. If your open rate is anything less than about 45%, right? That's no good, right? Everyone on this webinar has the potential and should have email open rates of 45%, about 45% and above for each email that you're sending out. And the way that you're going to do that is by properly segmenting your emails. And I'll give you some very concrete examples of this. When we segment our email campaigns, we basically increase everything good and decrease everything bad, right? We still need to think about what we want the outcome to be for that email. We definitely need to think about the targeting. That's where the segmentation comes in, right? And when we think about those things, we're going to increase our opens, our click-throughs, which are engagements, which is what we want. I want to say we tend to think about unsubscribes as being really bad. I don't think unsubscribes are bad at all. Because if someone unsubscribes from your list, let them go. If they don't want to be receiving information from you, just be at peace with that. It's much better to have a smaller, more highly engaged email list than to have a bigger list where no one is opening the emails, right? Sure, you can say, oh, we have 10,000 people on our email list. But if you send that email newsletter out every month and you get a 15% open rate, that's a lot of people who aren't even seeing your messaging. So it doesn't matter that you have 10,000 people on that list. With email, we got a lot of data that we can deal with, right? There's some data that is known data that's internal, right? You know, whether they have purchased a ticket to a particular thing, if they're a member or not, if they are a subscriber, what level of donor they are. You can also glean sort of repertoire interest. You know, if somebody comes to the Nutcracker every year, they probably like story ballets, right? So one thing that we tend to forget when we're talking about email and looking at email data and ways to segment is what I have in blue here, and that's email behavior history, right? If someone opens your emails frequently, I would label them as highly engaged, no matter what their other criteria. If they're not a subscriber, they're not a donor, maybe they rarely come to your performances, but if they open almost every single email you send out, I would treat them in your email universe, I would treat them the same way as a 20-year subscriber, because they're telling you that they want to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to give you a really, really, really tactical suggestion here for email. This is something that you can implement right away or implement a version of right away, depending on how your segmentation and your programs work. So this is kind of one baby step into more effective email through looking at data and segmentation. So instead of sending that same email to everyone, let's break it up into 3 groups, right? And we're gonna assume that this is for a show, just for this example, right? Something that has tickets. So the first group is patrons who have already purchased tickets. Because if you only do one thing, if you're not currently doing this, suppress out the people who have already purchased from that sales email. right? Because there's nothing more annoying than receiving an email asking you to buy tickets for something that you already have tickets for, right? The second group I'm going to call new acquisitions, just to kind of make a big blanket kind of title for them. So new acquisitions are people who have not purchased, and you've identified that they're not highly engaged. So maybe they've bought tickets in the past, maybe they've attended something, maybe they were a subscriber a long time ago, but they're lapsed. They're not in the lapsed subscriber group that you're actively trying to get back. They're the ones who haven't subscribed in quite some time, right? Whatever criteria you use to determine who is not highly engaged, this is that group, right? The next group is people who you identify are highly engaged. So maybe they're donors, maybe they are multi-buyers, so people who buy tickets to multiple things per season, but they're not a subscriber. Maybe they are a subscriber, but the show isn't included in their subscription. You know, whatever you determine as making someone be highly engaged. Oh, and those people that open your emails all the time, I would put them in this group. So with all three of these groups, you're going to talk to them differently, right? So your highly engaged people, they can withstand you using some of that jargon, right? And they care about, odds are they care about the soloist or what the conductor has to say about his approach to the piece. They care that the lead singer in the opera got a good review in the New York Times, because that holds weight to them. They know what that means, right? The people who are new acquisitions, those who are not highly engaged, those people, you're probably going to talk to them in a way that might be a little bit more explanatory and educational. You know, come at it from a different side. This might be more of, you know, like you're talking to a friend who maybe doesn't go to, let's say this is a symphony concert. Maybe doesn't go to the symphony, doesn't really know a lot about it. How would you describe the symphony concert to them, right? This is what's going to be more in line with that. And those people who have already purchased tickets, this actually gives you a really great customer service opportunity, right? Because you can send them an email that says, hey, you know, this is information about parking, and these are restaurants nearby, and oh, there's construction happening around the theater, so you might want to leave extra time, you know, little things like that. Okay. And then odds are what you do is after you send that email out, a little while later, maybe a week later, you're going to send essentially the same email out to the same group of people again, right? That's probably what you do now, to that same segment, whoever you were sending it to before. Rather than doing that, I would offer for you to send follow-up emails based on the data that your email software is giving you. So the first group for your follow-ups is going to be the people who didn't open the email at all. And this is the easiest one because they didn't see what was in the email. So you don't have to change anything in the email. All you have to do is change the subject line. Make it something a little bit more appealing, a little bit more compelling, whatever that might be. Now, don't go back and said, Ceci said we need to resend the email to every single person who didn't open it. Because if they didn't open it, they're telling you something, right? And you don't want to be annoying and continually sending them stuff. However, if, you know, maybe this is something, this particular email, the contents of it is something that you've identified is going to be really interesting to that particular segment, you can try sending it again. Or if it's very timely, you know, maybe you're offering a discount or a deadline of some sort is coming up, you know, you can try to resend that to see if you can get some additional opens. The next segment is going to be the people who opened the email but didn't click on your call to action button, right? Because you've identified what that call to action is going to be when you identify your desired outcome, right? So you're going to have some sort of call to action link or button in there. So your subject line was good enough and compelling enough that they opened it, but for some reason, what was in the email wasn't enough to actually get them to click. Some of these reasons can be things that we can't control. Maybe this particular concert, they opened the email, they looked at the date of the concert, and they realized they were going to be out of town, right? We can't really control that. We can't really know that, right? But what we can do is we can try to send for the rest of the people, try to send some additional information that's going to sort of keep them engaged and take them on that next step of that journey. So maybe that's additional information about the performers. Maybe you have a little video of the conductor talking about, why he chose this piece or his favorite part of the piece or something to look out for, right? Anything that will continue to engage the people that you're talking to. Excuse me. The next one is going to be the people who opened the email, clicked on the call to action button, but then didn't end up buying, right? So you got them. Your subject line was awesome. Whatever was in the email was super amazing. But for some reason, when they clicked and went over to your website or wherever you sent them to purchase, something stopped them. A lot of times this can really be something like, oh, well, I know that I want to go to this, but I wanted to check out seats and to see what the seats were available. And then my attention got taken elsewhere and I kind of forgot about it, right? These folks need a reminder, right? So the follow-up email is going to be the reminder. So this is where you're going to see your highest rates of conversion, right? And we know who the people are who have bought because you can download that out of your whatever system you use to sell tickets and import that into your email system and identify them as having bought tickets, right? This is how we know who has already bought. So this one here, it's going to be a small group, right? So if you're thinking about how I'll probably do email now, that first segment is going to be the biggest group. And then the second segment is going to be a kind of medium-sized group. But then this third one is going to be the smallest group of the three. And it's okay, even though it's the smallest group of the three, you're still going to see the most conversions off of it because it's targeted and it's segmented, right? And what you're sending to that group, that they opened and clicked, but they didn't buy. So what is the next thing that you're going to send them to help just take them that next extra step? Oh, I want to give you two resources here. Canva, I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with Canva. Canva is an online free sort of graphic design-y software. It's really great for making email images, especially if you need to make like a little collage of images, something like that. And then I also want to tell you about the Google Campaign URL Builder. And this is what's going to allow you to create a custom link in your emails and in your social media that will allow you to track traffic a lot more efficiently in your Google Analytics. Because I know that every single person on this webinar right now is looking at their Google Analytics frequently, right? I'm just going to think that. If you're not, please do. And it's going to allow you to see the efficacy of your campaigns a lot more clearly. I'll make sure to provide that resource, a link to that resource as well. All right, before we start social media for our last few minutes, any questions?
Yeah, so you talked a lot about segmentation as far as, kind of looking at your data and determining the categories into which you should segment. Alyssa is asking, I guess where she is, they have one giant email list.
Yeah.
Not a lot of specific lists. And she's asking about what do you think about sending out a mass survey, asking subscribers to check boxes next to the lists that they would be interested in, almost like self-segmenting. What are your thoughts on that?
This is a common question, and I can tell you that most of the time, those kinds of things do not result in a lot of participation. If you want to send one, by all means do it. You'll probably get some people to do that. What I might offer instead is that, well, number one, you can certainly segment by email behavior. You can go back and look at your past emails that you've sent out. You can see who has opened them regularly, who hasn't opened them regularly. And if you're sending out something like a newsletter that has a lot of different features, or really actually any kind of email, you'll be able to see who has clicked on what. So if you're sending out an email newsletter that has, an opera show, a ballet performance, and a modern dance performance in it, you can reasonably assign a modern dance interest to the people who clicked on that modern dance link or call to action. I would probably start there first. And then just make sure every time you load new people into that list, that you make sure that you know where they are, who they are, and that you're tagging them or segmenting them appropriately. So you know that, you know, Susie Smith came to, I don't know, Alvin Ailey, right? You can tag them with whatever tag you've got in the system or whatever segment you're using, whatever you're calling that, to identify that that is their interest.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it sounds like, you know, it may take a little more time and effort to kind of do it on your own end, but the return on it is much better than relying on people to, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And if you're using anything like, you know, Constant Contact or MailChimp or anything like that, you're going to be able to see that click data and be able to, you know, take those people out and segment them relatively easily. So that would be a first recommendation. So.
All right. Alyssa says, thank you so much. I'll take this back to the team.
Okay, let's do social media with our last few minutes together. So, of course, with social, it's the same thing. Not everyone on social media should get the same content or the same messaging, right? Like I talked about in the very, very beginning, it's important to look at who you're trying to reach and what social media channels they are likely to be on already, because you're not going to convert someone from one channel to another, right? If you're trying to reach a 25-year-old, you're not going to get them to go from Instagram over to Facebook just to read your content, as much as we might like that to happen, right? These two graphs here are basically showing that Facebook has the most active users. This is still the case even with all of the stuff that's going on with Facebook right now. It still has the most active users. And for most arts organizations, the next logical audiences are people who are within the demographic range where they would be an active user on Facebook. So if you choose to spend a lot more time on one social media platform versus another, I would recommend that Facebook be it, because probably the majority, and I'm making a generalization, of course, the majority of the people that you're trying to reach and engage are going to be there. The other reason why you can't send the same messaging and content is because every platform has a different feel, right? Not only does it have different demographics, but you know, you might talk in a different way on a particular platform, right? Instagram tends to be much more casual and you got to use all the hashtags on Instagram, right? Facebook may be a little bit more formal, right? And hashtags don't really do much of anything. So you have to take into consideration the targeting and the people who are using those platforms, right? And also the post structure. Facebook, like I just mentioned, Facebook hashtags don't really do much, but in Facebook, you want to have a click-through link, right? Because you want to guide people from Facebook over to your website to take an action. Instagram, you can't have a click-through link in the body of the post, right? But you have to have all those hashtags. And above all, and this actually goes for every single channel, right? People know when they're being marketed to, right? When you're advertising something. And especially on social media, you want to make your messaging feel as native as possible on that particular platform, right? So Instagram is a really great example of this. You know, on Instagram, using kind of funny hashtags are really kind of the mode, right? So you could post a picture of your orchestra playing and, you know, have a little bit of a cheeky caption there in the body of your post that talks about what they're doing. And then, you know, use the hashtag squad goals or something like that, right? You wouldn't necessarily do that on Facebook, right? So making sure that you're talking to people, again, in a way that they understand on those platforms is so important. How you can use your own data for this is if you do that append, you probably will know the age of the majority of your folks, so you can really target in and zero in on which platforms you're using, but also using the data that those social media channels give you is so important. With Facebook, they give you insights, right? So you can see the demographic makeup. You can see what types of posts people are engaging with more than others, right? If you see a particular type of post is getting a lot more likes, comments, shares, clicks, do more of that, right? If you have posts that are not getting any engagement, but you feel that the information therein is really important, maybe try to swizzle that around so that you can get more engagement on those particular posts. Right? The other thing that I can't end without talking about on Facebook and also Instagram as well are some of the other tools that you can use specifically with paid campaigns. I could do a whole webinar just about paid campaigns, but using paid promoted post campaigns and custom audiences and lookalike audiences, these are very effective. A custom audience in Facebook is when you upload your ticket buyer list, subscriber list, donor list, whatever that list is, into Facebook, and it matches Facebook users, right? So it finds your folks on Facebook, and then you can serve them with specific content. A lookalike list is based off of that custom audience, right? So you've already loaded your folks in there. Facebook has sort of created this demographic and interest profile of them. And then you can tell Facebook, I want to find and talk to more people like them, to really further target things down so that you're making sure that your message is reaching the right person on that right channel. Right. Here are some more recommended resources specifically for social media. So we come back to the Google Campaign URL Builder again. Really, really handy for social, right? Because then you can track that traffic a lot more cleanly. There's another tool called Landscape, which actually I love a lot. This is free also. If you just need to crop a photo and make it the right size for Facebook or Instagram, you don't have to open Photoshop for that. You can use this little tool called Landscape, and it's by the Sprout Social people. So if you Google Sprout Social and Landscape, it'll be the first thing that comes up. Really, really handy, quick, and easy. You don't even have to have an account to use it. The other two things down below are ways to make videos. And videos do really, really well on social. And depending on who you're trying to talk to, providing them with video content that they will find compelling is going to yield pretty good results for you. So the one on the right, that's actually Spark. And if you have an Adobe Creative Suite account already, you have Spark. It's a really quick and easy way to create videos. The other one is Promo, and it is not free, but it's pretty affordable. It's a really easy way for you to create short little marketing-y videos, and it has music that's already licensed in there, B-roll type content that's already licensed in there, but you can add your own. And you can create just really short, quick little things. So these are all are resources that I personally use and that can really help your social media campaigns. So before we end, I want to bring it back to this sentiment that it is all about relevance. Relevance is what is going to get you those results. Remember, every time you're going to send a communication out, stop and think, what is the outcome that I'm looking for? Who am I trying to reach? Who am I talking to with this communication? And what messaging are they going to find to be relevant and also compelling? Okay, last questions. I know we're like, oh gosh, we're 4 minutes over time.
Oh my gosh, panic. No, we can still hang on for a few more minutes. If anybody else has questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. This was really informative, Ceci. I know there are a lot of takeaways that I will be walking away with from this, at least. I'm sure everybody else listening in, really gained some valuable insight on a little bit more marketing strategies for their organizations. Thank you so much for joining us today. It looks like we are good on the questions. But I just wanted to remind everyone also that we will post a recording of the webinar. If you missed this at the beginning, the recording of the webinar will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow, likely tomorrow afternoon. So if you want to re-listen to it, or if you missed parts of it, you can find it there. I'll be sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered for the webinar. Is there anything else you would like to add, Ceci?
My only thing is, if you think of a question later, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to give advice. I will also, Katie, I'll work with you to make sure that I can send over some links to resources. And once it's up on YouTube, I'll put those in a comment underneath so that everybody can see them.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Perfect. Well, I guess that does it for today's presentation. Thanks again to Ceci, and thank you for all of you for tuning in. We are so glad to have you. Stay tuned to our Facebook and Twitter feeds for news about our next webinar, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.